Generals sat at long tables in granite-walled rooms, speaking in measured tones, pointing at screens, nodding at readiness reports. There was no shouting, no chaos, no theatrical declarations. There was only the quiet, deliberate language of people executing a plan that had taken decades to prepare. Phase 1, complete. Phase 2, ready. Encrypted orders moved through fiber optic cables buried in ocean floors, through quantum relay stations hidden in the crust of the moon, through communication nodes disguised as geological survey equipment in the asteroid belt. The messages were short. The people who received them understood. They had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Far beyond the moon, in a region of space the alien fleet's charts marked as an unremarkable stretch of empty void, the dark was not empty at all. It never had been. The ships began powering up slowly, carefully, the way a predator rises from concealment, without sudden movement, without wasted energy. Their engines, cold for years to avoid any thermal signature that alien scouts might detect, began to glow from deep within their hulls. First one, then 10, then 100, then thousands. They were not emergency vessels cobbled together in desperate hours. They were not prototype designs rushed from drawing board to launch pads in the chaos of invasion. They were finished. They were perfected. They had been built in places no alien cartographer had ever mapped, in the hollow cores of asteroids whose surfaces bore only rock and silence, in the shadow of moons whose far sides had been reclassified by human governments as restricted scientific research zones, behind fields of electromagnetic debris that appeared, to any outside observer, as nothing more interesting than the remnants of an old comet. Humanity had known, for a very long time, that something was coming. Not this species, not this empire necessarily, but something, because the mathematics of a crowded galaxy and a visible, inhabited world pointed in only one direction. And so, quietly, patiently, without telling the rest of the galaxy what it was doing, Earth had prepared. Not for defense alone, for war. Above the planet, the alien fleet tightened its formation for the second wave of bombardment. Target acquisition locked onto population centers. The commanders had decided mercy was inefficient. If Earth would not surrender, it would be made into an example. That was when their long-range scouts vanished. No distress signal. No explosion registered on their sensors. No wreckage. The 3 vessels assigned to monitor the deep perimeters simply ceased to transmit, between one heartbeat and the next, as if the universe had quietly folded them away. The commander felt the unease behind his eyes sharpen into something colder. Find them, he ordered. His officers tried. Their instruments found nothing but static. Then every screen on every ship in the fleet flickered simultaneously. The flicker lasted only a second. It was enough. In that second, officers across the fleet looked up from their consoles, looked out their viewports, and saw something that rewrote everything they believed about this mission. Space behind them was no longer empty. The human fleet materialized without ceremony, no dramatic energy surge, no shockwave, no visible method of arrival. One moment there was nothing. The next, thousands of warships hung in perfect, silent formation between the alien fleet and the void it had come from. No lights, no signals. No declarations, just dark metal and cold geometry, stretching in every direction as far as alien optics could resolve. At the center of the formation, a single vessel dwarfed everything around it. The Titan-class warship was so vast it did not so much occupy space as define it in that region. Its hull bore no markings, no insignia visible at this range, nothing that suggested ego or ceremony. It simply existed, with a mass and presence that registered in the body before it registered in the mind. The alien commander stood very still at his viewport for a long moment. They weren't surprised, he said quietly, to no one in particular. So, Earth. They were never surprised. He turned from the viewport. Open hyperspace corridors. All ships, immediate retreat. The navigation officer looked up from his console with an expression that the commander had never seen on that particular face before. It was the expression of someone reporting an impossibility. So, the officer said carefully, hyperspace will not open. Jump engines were overloading across the fleet, not from damage, but from interference. The hyperspace entry points they needed were saturated with energy fields that their own physics said should not exist at this density, in this configuration. Every escape corridor had been identified and sealed before the fleet had even known it needed to run. The trap had been built around them slowly, invisibly, across 12 hours of patient silence. Earth had not been waiting to survive. It had been waiting for the invaders to move into exactly the position they were now standing in. The first human strike was not an explosion. It was a whisper, precision beams of energy, calibrated to the exact structural tolerances of alien command vessel architecture. Information gathered over decades of careful intelligence work reached across a distance and touched each flagship's communication array with surgical, contemptuous ease. Not to destroy the ships, to silence their leaders, to sever the head from the body. Without centralized command, the alien fleet did what all armies do when their officers stop speaking. It broke apart. Formation dissolved into confusion. Individual captains, suddenly acting on their own judgment, made contradictory decisions. Some pushed forward, some pulled back, some simply held position, waiting for orders that never came. Into that confusion, humanity released the rest. Missile swarms erupted from the flanks of the human formation, moving in coordinated patterns that overwhelmed point defense systems designed to handle threats from a single direction. Stealth fighters, small enough to slip between enemy cruisers, appeared at close range and targeted the precise junction points where alien warship sections connected, the places where structural integrity was lowest, where a well-placed strike collapsed a ship from within rather than burning through its armored hull. The Titan-class warship fired its heavy cannons once. The light from that single discharge was visible, briefly, from Earth's surface, a white flare that lasted 2 seconds and left an entire alien battle group as expanding plasma where solid vessels had been. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, what remained of the invading fleet attempted to scatter into deep space. Individual ships, some of them badly damaged, others simply terrified, pushed their engines to maximum and fled in every direction, hoping that the vastness of the void would offer them cover. The Titan-class warship sent one command across the human fleet's communication network. Pursue. Human divisions split apart with practice efficiency, each already assigned its targets, already running the intercept calculations. Fast destroyers ran down cruisers that had 2 hours of head start and caught them within 90 minutes. Stealth ships traced even the smallest escape pods. Long-range weapons platforms, positioned before the battle had even begun, locked onto the jump coordinates that fleeing ships would need to use and made those coordinates lethal. No one escaped. The alien empire received the broken transmissions of their invading fleet in fragments, half-words, distorted images, the kind of static that communicates catastrophe even when the language is lost. Their reinforcement fleets mobilized in emergency hours, massive armadas that represented some of the most powerful military force the Empire had built over centuries. They arrived at the edge of Earth's system and found human warships already waiting, arranged in a formation that blocked every viable approach, every hyperspace approach vector, every tactical option that the Empire's war planners would consider sending a fleet through. The reinforcements did not advance. They stopped, hanging in space, reading the geometry of what they were looking at. The message required no translation. You will not pass. Across the star systems adjacent to the attacking Empire's territory, humanity's hidden capabilities continued to reveal themselves in sequence, a deliberate unfolding, as if Earth had chosen to show its hand one card at a time rather than all at once. Defensive grids appeared around key hyperspace routes. Stations that appeared on no alien chart activated along supply corridors. Military outposts that the Empire depended on for communication went dark, not destroyed, simply isolated, cut off from each other and from command. Within 2 days, the Empire that had launched a surprise invasion of Earth was itself surrounded. Every major supply line was severed. Every military route was watched. Every attempt to reassemble a coherent response was intercepted before it could begin. Humanity struck only military targets. Shipyards, weapons manufacturing facilities, command centers. The cities of alien worlds continued their ordinary lives undisturbed. Civilian infrastructure remained intact. This was not an accident, and it was not mercy. It was strategy, a message written in restraint as clearly as it had been written in firepower. We are choosing how much of you to destroy, and we have chosen this much, and we can choose more. The Galactic Council chambers, usually filled with the diplomatic noise of 100 species managing their competing interests, had grown very quiet. Representatives who had once dismissed Earth as an afterthought in galactic politics sat motionless before their holographic displays, watching reports compile in real time. Humanity had not panicked. It had not fought with rage or desperation or the chaotic energy of a species cornered and lashing out. It had fought with something far more unsettling. It had fought with a plan. The alien empire's capital system fell quickly once the outer defenses were gone. Military shipyards that had taken generations to build burned in orbit around planets that had never expected to see war come home. Defense stations blinked offline in a sequence that looked, to the engineers who had designed them, horribly like someone working methodically through a checklist. Every attempt to reorganize a defense, every emergency council, every mobilization order, every desperate proposal for a counterattack was intercepted or disrupted before it could become action. The empire that had looked at Earth and seen a primitive world ripe for conquest had not understood something fundamental about the species it chose to attack. Humanity did not simply react. It anticipated. It prepared. It planned not for the battles it expected to fight, but for the battles it might someday have to fight, and it had been doing this quietly, patiently, without advertisement, for decades. When the last significant alien battle fleet was cornered in the space above the Empire's homeworld, surrounded, outgunned, its commanders exhausted and its crews terrified, humanity did not fire. The human fleet held position, weapons locked, silent. The Titan-class warship moved forward alone, crossing the distance between the two forces at a slow, unhurried pace that communicated its confidence more eloquently than any display of firepower could have. It stopped just beyond the range of the planet's remaining defense systems, close enough to make its intention clear, far enough to make a choice. A transmission went out across every known frequency simultaneously. It reached the trapped fleet above the homeworld. It reached the Galactic Council chambers. It reached every inhabited system within signal range, traveling outward at the speed of light to touch worlds that had never sent a ship to fight in this war, that had watched from their distant safety and whispered their quiet judgments about the species that lived on the small blue world at the edge of the spiral arm. The voice in the transmission was calm, not cold, that implied emotion suppressed. It was simply calm, the way deep water is calm, the way long patience becomes indistinguishable from certainty. Earth did not begin this war. You chose it, for reasons that seemed sound to you at the time. We understand. We even anticipated it. This ends now, not because we cannot continue, and not because we wish to demonstrate mercy, but because we have demonstrated what we came to demonstrate, and the lesson does not require further illustration. We are returning home. You will not follow. The routes remain watched. The stations remain active. The fleets remain ready. Live with what you've learned. Surrender came within the hour. The alien commanders transmitted their capitulation on every frequency, making certain the entire galaxy received it. There was no negotiation over terms. There were no terms. Humanity had not asked for territory or tribute or apology. It had asked for nothing except the end of hostilities, and the end of any future thought about beginning them again. In the council chambers, no one celebrated. The representatives of 24 spacefaring civilizations sat in silence that lasted a very long time. Some of them, in the privacy of their own thoughts, were performing rapid reassessments of every assumption they had ever made about the young world in the unremarkable corner of the spiral arm. Some of them were reviewing the treaties they had signed with the Empire that had just been dismantled in 48 hours. Some of them were reviewing their own military capabilities and running quiet calculations about ratios and readiness and the kind of fleet humanity had apparently been building in secret while the rest of the galaxy discussed its limitations. All of them were quiet. The whisper that spread through galactic trade networks in the weeks that followed began small and became ubiquitous. It moved through diplomatic channels and merchant gossip and military intelligence briefings with equal ease, because it was simple enough to survive translation into any language and complicated enough to carry real weight. Do not provoke Earth. Military academies on a dozen worlds began the slow, humbling process of rewriting their doctrine. Tactical models that had been designed to account for human technology at a projected development rate were quietly archived, replaced with new models built around a different and deeply unsettling premise: that human technology existed at an unknown level, and that the unknown quantity was a relevant one. On worlds whose fleets had been part of the defeated empire, alien civilians looked at their skies and thought about the ships that had vanished there, destroyed or captured by a species most of them had been raised to consider a minor concern in galactic affairs. The fear that settled over those worlds was not the simple fear of a stronger enemy. It was a more complex fear, the fear of having been entirely wrong about something, of having built a picture of the universe that didn't include a crucial element, and of now having to live in the corrected version. Human fleets did not occupy the territories they had moved through. They did not establish bases or install governments or claim any of the systems they had passed. When the war was over, they turned around and went home, leaving behind only the ruins of military installations and the memory of the precision with which those ruins had been created. The message in that restraint was as loud as anything that had been fired. We don't want your worlds. We want to be left alone. These are not the same thing, and the difference matters. On Earth, the rebuilding began quietly. Cities that had been struck in the opening bombardment cleared their rubble and began to build again, not frantically, not with the desperate urgency of a people who needed to prove something, but steadily, the way people build when they intend to stay. Communication relays came back online. Markets reopened. Schools resumed. The ordinary texture of human life reasserted itself with a stubborn, unhurried persistence that was, in its own way, as remarkable as anything the fleet had done in the battles above the ecliptic. Children played in streets that had been lit by alien fire a month before. They played with the easy confidence of children who live in a world they trust, which meant they had inherited something their parents and grandparents and the quiet architects of Earth's long preparation had worked very hard to give them, the right to grow up without being afraid of the sky. The men and women who had planned and executed the counterattack returned to their lives without ceremony. They had never sought attention. They did not seek it now. They attended meetings in unremarkable buildings and filed reports that would be classified for generations, and when people asked them what it had been like, most of them said some variation of, "It went as planned." They said this without pride, without false modesty, simply as a statement of fact. The plan had taken a long time to build. It had required patience on a scale that most species, who thought of patience in terms of days or months, would struggle to comprehend. It had required every generation that contributed to it to accept that they might never see the moment it was needed, to build something for the benefit of people they would never meet against a threat that might arrive a century after their own deaths. This, more than the fleet, more than the technology, more than the tactics, was what the rest of the galaxy struggled to understand about what had happened. Humanity had not reacted to a threat. It had foreseen the shape of the universe and prepared for what that shape implied, across decades, quietly, together, in secret, a species that argued loudly about everything finally agreeing silently on one thing. The silence before the attack had not been the silence of ignorance or helplessness. It had been the silence of something that already knew what it was going to do. Months passed. The galaxy did not recover its confidence, because confidence built on misunderstanding does not recover when the misunderstanding is corrected. It has to be replaced with something built on true ground. The Galactic Council eventually convened the formal sessions that protocol required. Representatives spoke of treaties and security frameworks and the importance of mutual communication. None of them sent a delegation to Earth first. They drafted proposals and revised them and drafted them again and found, each time they reached the point of actually transmitting the message, that they were not entirely sure what tone to use. The usual diplomatic register, a careful blend of authority, courtesy, and implicit assumption of relative status, suddenly felt uncertain in its foundations. Earth, for its part, waited. It did not send delegations to the Council. It did not issue statements. It did not explain itself. It existed, as it had always existed, orbiting its sun, rebuilding, living, watching the silence it had imposed on the galaxy with calm and patient eyes. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, in the hollow cores of rocks that no alien cartographer had ever marked, in the far-side structures of moons whose surfaces suggested only geology and emptiness, humanity continued to do what it had always done. It built, it prepared, it thought about the future with a seriousness that most other species reserved for the past. The stars above Earth were quiet now, but differently quiet than they had been before. Before, the quiet had been the quiet of distance and ignorance. Now it was the quiet of a galaxy that had learned to listen carefully before it spoke, to look closely before it moved, to ask a question it had not previously thought to ask before deciding it already knew the answer. The question was simple. What have they already prepared for this? The lesson had not been written in fire, though fire had been part of it. It had not been written in surrender, though surrender had been delivered. It had been written in the 12 hours of silence before the human fleet appeared from nowhere, in the 40 minutes of a battle that ended a war, in the restraint of a species that could have taken worlds and chose instead to go home. The galaxy had made a mistake. It had looked at Earth and seen what Earth allowed it to see. It had read the visible part of a civilization, the arguments, the borders, the noise, and concluded that what was visible was all there was. It had never considered what the silence might contain. Now it knew, and in that knowing, something had shifted permanently in the architecture of galactic politics, in the calculations that civilizations made when they thought about expansion and power and what corners of the universe they could safely reach into. A line had been drawn, not on any map, not in any treaty, but in the shared understanding of what the universe had just demonstrated about itself. There were old powers in the galaxy, ancient and assured, with history stretching across millennia and fleets that could darken the sun. And then there was Earth, young, strange, unpredictable, bafflingly united in its depths despite all its surface noise. And the old powers looked at Earth now with careful, quiet eyes. Not with respect. Exactly. Not yet. Respect takes time to build on new foundations. But with something that had not existed before the attack. With caution. With the awareness that silence is not the same as absence. That stillness is not the same as weakness. That a world which does not announce its strength is not necessarily a world without it. With the understanding that somewhere, in the dark between stars, in the cold and patient quiet of the void, a species was still watching, still preparing, still thinking about the future with a long, unhurried intelligence of something that had decided a long time ago that it intended to be here for a very long time. The stars above Earth were quiet, and in a galaxy that had learned, at considerable cost, what that quiet meant, the quiet held. The attack began without warning. No ultimatum was delivered. No signal of peace was extended. No message flickered across Earth communication arrays demanding surrender or offering terms. There was only fire, sudden, absolute, and merciless, descending from a sky that had, just moments before, looked perfectly ordinary. They came without sound at first. Alien warships materialized above the planet like vast, dark continents drifting between Earth and the stars, their hulls so massive they blotted out entire constellations. For a fraction of a second, the world simply stared upward in collective disbelief. Then the orbital stations began to explode. One by one, humanity's eyes in space were blinded. Satellites shattered into clouds of glittering debris. The sky above the largest cities shifted from blue to a deep, apocalyptic crimson as alien energy weapons superheated the upper atmosphere. People in 100 countries stepped outside, looked up, and felt something ancient and primal coil inside their chests, the instinct of prey recognizing a predator. News channels went dark mid-broadcast. Anchors vanished from screens. Emergency alerts blared across continents for 30 seconds, then died into static. The silence that followed was worse than any alarm. Military command centers across the globe erupted with controlled fury. Generals barked orders. Radar operators called out coordinates. Fighter pilots scrambled for aircraft they already knew would be outmatched. The world's greatest militaries, built over centuries of conflict and competition, were being measured against something they had never truly prepared to face, and the math was not encouraging. Across the galaxy, in the crystalline chambers of the Galactic Council, 24 species watched the invasion unfold through holographic projections. Some observed with cold academic interest. Others exchanged quiet murmurs of grim satisfaction. A few showed something approaching pity, though it was brief. Earth was young. Everyone knew it. Young, fractured, brilliant in some narrow ways, but ultimately a world still arguing with itself, still drawing borders in the date, still learning what it meant to reach beyond its own atmosphere. The attacking empire had chosen their target with surgical precision. A world rich in resources, occupying a strategically valuable corner of the spiral arm, defended by technology perhaps 200 years behind the galactic standard. Surrender within the hour, one of the alien commanders had reportedly told his officers aboard the flagship. The projection of that exchange circulated quietly among council observers. Most found it reasonable. A few found it generous. The first wave of bombardment targeted communication towers and military defense platforms with frightening accuracy. Weapons installations vanished before they could fire. Coastal defense networks collapsed in seconds. The alien fleet commanders leaned back in their command chairs and waited for the surrender signals to begin. They did not come. Instead, something strange happened. Earth's communication networks, every civilian broadcast, every commercial satellite relay, every unencrypted military channel, went silent simultaneously. Not jammed, not destroyed. Deliberately, precisely shut down from the inside. The cacophony of a panicking civilization simply stopped, as if someone had placed a hand over the planet's mouth. Military signals didn't disappear. They transformed, shifting into encrypted frequencies so deeply layered and alien in their architecture that the invaders' most sophisticated decryption systems returned nothing but noise. Earth had not lost its voice. It had changed the language. Then came the total silence. No distress calls. No panicked civilian transmissions pleading for mercy. No diplomatic channels opening in desperate negotiation. Just a vast, humming quiet that stretched from the surface of the planet all the way out to the edges of the alien fleet's sensor range. The alien commanders exchanged uncertain glances. This was not the response they had anticipated. Fear produced noise, screaming, begging, broadcasting. Every species they had ever conquered had flooded the spectrum with desperation inside the first 10 minutes. Humans had gone quiet in 5. Psychological collapse, one officer suggested. They're in shock. The commander said nothing. He stared at the silent planet below and felt, for the first time, a faint and formless unease settled somewhere behind his eyes. His senses began reporting anomalies. Small ones at first. Distortions at the extreme edge of scanning range. Shadows where there should have been empty space. Energy readings that appeared for a fraction of a second, and then vanished before they could be triangulated. His technical officers dismissed them as sensor ghosts, debris clouds from the destroyed orbital stations, interfering from the planet's own disrupted electromagnetic field. He wanted to believe them. He almost did. 12 hours passed. Below, Earth burned in places. Fires in 3 major cities. Craters where defense installations had once stood, smoke rising in black columns from a dozen coastlines. From orbit, the planet looked wounded, beaten. The alien fleet commanders wrote their reports to the Empire with the comfortable confidence of hunters who had already made the kill and were simply waiting for the animal to stop moving. Human resistance, minimal. Planetary surrender estimated within 1 rotation. But beneath the surface of that wounded world, in caverns drilled into bedrock a kilometer deep, in underwater facilities resting in ocean trenches where no alien sensor could penetrate, in mountain bunkers sealed behind layers of electromagnetic shielding, humanity was not panicking. It was not collapsing. It was not even afraid, at least not in the way the invaders imagined. It was working.